Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at DriveThruRPG.com. This video will be reviewing the sourcebook Monsters of Murka, designed by Action Fiction for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links via online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Tom, Huskarl124, and Wizard Princess. And gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcus Davis, Vicente Gilberto, Sean A.K. Cert to be Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Arash, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Skelly, and Nick. Thank you all very much for your support. I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but you can kind of do that with this one. So this is, or by its title especially, this is a pretty obvious satirization of America. Its culture, its history, its politics, its people, its celebrities, its excess, all of the above. And the question is, going into this, is it just one big joke? And how well does that joke land? Or is it a legit source book? Does it actually create a world that you would want to play in and have the mechanics and interesting world building and scenarios and things that would make you want to play in this world? And I think the answer is that it's both of those things. First of all, it's over 200 pages, so it, as a necessity, has to expand beyond just being a joke. I mean, there are certain areas where it just drives the joke into the ground and you just kind of get the same repeat over and over again, which I'll get into. But it's made up of 9 chapters, I believe it's 9 chapters, that covers just about everything you could want from a source book of its own world. In this case, it's our world, but kind of given the, fantasy treatment. Like, it's Shadowrun, but minus the sci-fi stuff, or all the 5e races and classes and things exist in this universe, but it still has the history of our world. It kind of reminds me, what was that Will Smith movie on Netflix, that Bright, where that one also reminded me of Shadowrun, where it's our world, but it just happens that magic exists, elves exist, orcs exist, and all that. It almost takes a page from that. I wish it were a little more clever with its satire. I think a lot of satire tends to just have low-hanging fruit, and there's so much that's just so easy to mock and make fun of, and that's partly what the counterculture is, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel to make fun of American culture, because it's just mockery in of itself. I mean, it's the excess and the ridiculousness and the celebrity. It's also so ubiquitous. I mean, one of America's biggest exports is culture. So it's very tricky to create an entire book that I think lovingly embraces that, while also definitely saying, these are the things that are ridiculous and funny, and also saying these are the things that are ridiculous and bad. It definitely points a finger at some of those, and it's not necessarily just all. It does punch up, I believe. I would say for the most part, pretty much all of it is punching up. Which is to say, that's a comedic term to say you're not going to mock people who are already oppressed and have a challenging life because of the systemic factors that are against them. Instead, it's going to always mock and dismantle those who are in power. And that is what this sets out to do, which doesn't necessarily mean it's all just mocking the right and Trump and Republicans, which is, I mean, you can read through this and it's very clear where the designers' politics and beliefs lie, which are pretty closely attuned to my own, but it still punches in different directions. There's Queen Killary is a lich, for example, she's got a shadowy cabal, so it still looks at a lot of these establishment people and factions and things, and tries to satirize all of that, and I think it's, for the most part, pretty effective. It's a gorgeous supplement from a production standpoint, absolutely professional layout and design, amazing original artwork throughout, just an incredibly well-produced, well-edited. All of those factors are absolutely amazing. For the most part, it's more concerned about world building, and then there are some new player options, which we'll get through. And I can't go page to page because there's just so much here to cover, being 9 chapters over 200 pages. But it's mostly concerned with building up this world, focusing on individual regions such as Washtown and Seattle and Hollywoods. Those are the kind of, and those, in my opinion, those are the weakest chapters because they're very just low-hanging fruit, very obvious, analogies to what they're trying to make fun of here. But the good news is there's a lot of fun history here. Like I said, it does that cool world building where it's like our world, but there's magic exists. So instead of dropping an atomic bomb in World War II, we ripped open a portal into the Eldritch Domain. Like that kind of stuff is cool world building, and that really ignites this whole thing where, okay, yeah, we're making fun of American culture specifically, but also there's this, we take place in the real world, but it's got all these fantasy elements in it, which to me automatically makes it more interesting and cool. So I liked that aspect. And I thought the history chapter, which is the first one, is one of the strongest because it goes through, it covers the Revolutionary War, the founding of America, the Civil War, the establishment of slavery, how humans have oppressed the other races in this case, the World War II, the Vietnam War, all the way up to the turn of the century into the millennium with the rise of the kind of fascist Trumplican. So I'm just actually going to read a passage because I really do love the writing here, and I think it's very well done in a lot of cases, and I think the history is one of the strongest written portions. Look at my notes and see where I wrote down where I liked that chapter. Let's see, where are we? Chapter 17 is what I wrote down. Okay. I really liked how this read. As the world shrank for the first time in centuries, the voices that cried out the loudest were finally heard. For the first time in living memory, all Murkans had come face to face with the crimes of the past. Native citizens told stories of the death of their nations. Freedom fighters revealed some of the dark places where slavery had managed to live on. And everywhere people began to realize the truth that had started in the jungles of Nami all those years ago. We're not the heroes anymore, and maybe we never were. Murkans were beginning to demand morality from their government and people, often citing the kings of old, such as Abram the Great. Murka had to change, it had to progress, and what scared everyone was that the necessary change might leave Murka looking a little less Murkan. Now, aside from the fact that, yes, the names are very silly, and that's something that this entire supplement struggles with, which is gently poking fun at all of the people and places' names by just placing them with slightly different names, that's actually a really good point, and that's very insightful, and I thought that really brought the whole history set, which I actually read all 20 pages of this first chapter, into a really poignant moment in time about why we've reached this era of divisiveness. So I thought that was actually very well written, and I think one of the strengths of satire is that it should be funny, but not necessarily laugh out loud joke funny, but more of a chuckling and then oh yeah, it's kind of it starts those conversations and realizations. It's very much a dismantling of the current worldview and how to handle that through humor, which is a human response to dealing with these things. So I thought that was exceptionally well done. I'm just gonna kind of skip through, but it's a whole lot of about culture and excess, and it's making fun. There's actually a really nice little page here that summarizes pretty much 20 pages of how we reached the point, and it is very much done from a point of this is circa 2016. Trump has just won the election, or the Dawn, which is this megalomaniac, powerful force that's enslaved a lot of people's hearts and minds, has defeated Queen Killary in the election, and that's the time frame that we land in. So it's interesting looking at this and reviewing it in what I'm reviewing it now, which is 2020, which is a similar but also different worldview on what the different stakes and factions and things are. But I'm trying to put my frame of mind back into that time period where we were just getting to the beginning of these conversations and real dismantling of pulling back those long-seated wounds in history of American culture that a lot of Americans don't want to deal with. And by the way, if none of this interests you, or even then, if you are emotionally or psychologically exhausted by American politics and you just want to think of games as an escape from that, I think that's fine. I also think that you have the privilege to do that, and not a lot of people have the privilege to be able to escape this, because it's is a part of their life. It's the background radiation to their oppression. But I get it. Like I get it. Like it's especially now in 2020. Like it's hard. Like just getting through life and hearing all the news posts and everything. And I don't want to necessarily rant too much. I want to stick to the review. But I get if you want to move on and not engage with this stuff. And I'm trying to tell you, like, I think this is a really good product, but it is what it says it is. Like, it is a celebration, but also a very self-reflective look at the mostly badness of what American culture has wrought, but also that there are good people there doing good work. So it's not. If you're one of those rah and you don't want to see it, you can't stand to see the U.S. slandered in any way, then obviously this is going to upset you quite a bit. And if you want to move on, that's totally fine. I get it, but I think it really goes beyond just trying to provide a simple mockery in some cases, and actually provide a fun world to adventure in, and give some pretty fun player options, which I think is probably the strongest chapter here. I did like the history, and some of the later world building stuff I thought was okay, but I think they went a little too far. But the player options, which is the part which is basically all the new subclasses, is one of the strongest elements that this book provides, because at the end of the day, like, okay, the jokes can work, and for the most part I think they do. And the world building is nice, but what's in it for us as players that want to join into this world? If you want to build up this world, that's fine, but are we still playing, fighters and clerics and wizards and just being involved in this world? Or do you actually get to use some of that, glorious American culture infused into your players? And I think at least there's 15 player subclasses here, which is really impressive, and at least half of them I was incredibly impressed with. There's some new backgrounds, including being a lawyer, being an undergrad, which I love that the undergrad feature is massive amounts of debt. It's just straight bad. And there's a new variant you can play where you have human privilege, which I thought was also pretty cool. And there is a sidebar that warns, like, hey, we understand if you don't want to give like one player an advantage over the others, but also that's kind of what this world is about, which is, some folks have privilege over others. So there's a clever sidebar that basically says, hey, I know this is problematic, but it may actually be in keeping with the theme and be useful to explore. I love that, like, redneck is one of the backgrounds as well. And there's a new ranger subclass that'll go great with that, which is basically a cowboy/rancher. The artificer subclass, you can meld minds with different great American inventors and thus gain different abilities from them. And notice how I'm going through, and there is some amazing original artwork throughout on just about every page. The layout is incredible. Some of them are a celebration of like memes, and a lot of them are different celebrities and actors. There's Terry Crews right there in like full-blown armor. I think there's Stephen Colbert a little bit later on, which is fun. So it's not all just jokey art. There is some like legitimately amazing art. I'll show some of that later in a bit. But just incredible layout and production throughout, and the original artwork is certainly a big part of that. The barbarian path is the path of gains. You can drink protein shakes as pre-workout rituals. All that's awesome. The cleric domain, which I'm one of those that usually rolls his eyes at playing clerics, but the explosion domain sounds awesome. In fact, I was specifically picturing Mr. Torg from Borderlands. Explosion! The just incredible like Macho Man, which the WWE one is also later on in here. That's the monk subclass. But it's what these subclasses do is a really smart way of turning American culture and icons and things that we are maybe known for in, for better or for worse, into fun character classes. And I mean, I think it's best reflected in the fighter archetype, which is literally the action hero. Now, first of all, how many of you have made a fighter who was already basically an action hero? Like that was your model for making a character in D&D. You wanted to make a John McClane, or a Riggs and Murtaugh, or Rambo here, or Snake Plissken, or somebody, just a cool swagger action hero. And this is a really fun subclass that actually has a really neat mechanic, which is you gain adrenaline points by doing certain things, like taking the dash action, taking a certain amount of damage, killing hostile creatures, just performing like basically kind of the acts that would give you maybe inspiration, your GM discretion. And you use those adrenaline points to then fuel a bunch of different signature moves, which can include, disarming people. I love that a lot of them are literally like quotes. So you've got catchphrase, stay down, dodge this, did I fire 5 shots, curve the bullet, all these famous like action hero moves and scenes. You gain all those abilities. I thought that was just really clever and really fun, and a good example of how to take something that is an American pop culture icon, which is the 80s and 90s action hero, and actually turn that into a character class, which is a lot of fun. As I said, the Monk is a WWE star, which is really fun. There's Stephen Colbert as the Paladin. The Ranger was a... did I skip Ranger? There he is, the Cowboy. He's got the ability to summon a horse. He's got quick draw abilities. Yes, firearms exist in Murka, and of course, Murkan tradition with firearms goes way back, so I think everybody's got proficiency there. There's the Sorcerer, Jafar, Bezos. That's the kind of thing that I think maybe doesn't quite land as well, and it gets into that when we go to the world building section, which is there's just very, very clear... They don't even try to necessarily make it clever about who these people are or the level of power they have. It literally just slightly alters the name, but keeps their situation the same. Some things are better than others, but I feel like a lot of these things I kind of rolled my eyes with, to be honest. I do love that the Warlock Otherworldly Patron is just the people. So you're literally just a celebrity, and you live and die by the love of the people. And I thought that was a really clever way of using the Warlock system of, your patron grants you powers. In this case, it's just being, as a Warlock, you just are a celebrity, which I think is a Starfinder, whatever they call not the class, but background or something there, where you are basically a celebrity. That's your whole thing, is just people know you and you're famous and you've got all those charisma benefits there. So I thought it was really fun. It's a really neat section, and I thought it is a really good job of reflecting a lot of American culture, again, for better or for worse, but usually in a fun, iconic way. I like a lot of explosions, and I like all those for the character class section. What doesn't work quite as well for me is the next 3 chapters, which cover specific regions in the world of Murka, and I think it would have worked better had the designers kept this to maybe one region, and I think having it be Washington, D.C. would have been a perfectly acceptable one, because there's such a emphasis on modern American politics and how divisive they are, and Washington, D.C. is itself, and this is true, a reflection of the disparity that capitalism creates, which is the haves and the have-nots, very much so, and there's the very rich hoity-toity section that is the actual Capitol Hill area, and then it's a lot of very low poverty areas. And this is like literally true of real-world Washington, D.C., and true of this area of Washtown, which really nice map art, by the way, here of these cities. The Don is, of course, the megalomaniac who's in charge of I think it's called the Pale House. It's kind of this big layer dungeon. Would have been cool to actually get a dungeon there. And then there's Queen Killary, who's in charge of the Shadow Cabal, who lives in the underground. There's the Communal Party. Anti-Gang is supposed to be, I believe, Antifa. Like, it tries to cover all of these things, for better or for worse. And I think if it had been just this one section that covered all of this, Abram the Great is the, Abraham Lincoln, I think it would have been fine, and I think that would have been a good offshoot for different stories, especially because you could be working in the slum districts, helping the people out, and then also making these big overarching missions to go into the Pale House is this big dungeon. I don't see this world necessarily working as a full-blown campaign you're going to spend years and years and years in. I would have rather seen, okay, as something that we're trying to sustain as more than a one-shot joke, how about we have this region that you can adventure in over the course of several sessions that maybe ends up delving deep into the Pale House and finding the hidden truth behind the Dawn, and he's got like 7 different stat blocks and creatures that he comes in. I think that could have been effective, but instead it paints a wider brush and covers the entire country, and specifically has entire chapters on 3 areas, which is Seattle, so Pacific Northwest region, and Hollywoods, which is obviously the California one. And first of all, a lot of the jokes only land if you're from those cities or you're, for some reason, really well versed in those areas. Like, maybe a lot of us know kind of Hollywood stuff, but shockingly, New York City was not included as one. I think that was the more ubiquitous American city, if you're going to pick one. And it just kind of does a lot of the same tired jokes, where it just kind of slightly changes the names and towns and history of stuff to where, it really is like Bright, where it's like our history didn't really change because we're all living in a fantasy world and we're all magical races and magic exists and stuff. It's basically all the same. It's just slightly altered names and regions and things. And that's the part that doesn't quite... It's just not very clever to me. That's just rewriting, names and changing those things around. And the other disappointment is what I love seeing from source books are really fun and interesting adventure hooks. So you can give me all the world building you want, but I want to know what are the things that I can do now that are fun and interesting to do as a group of players wanting to play in this universe. And unfortunately, the designers here treated that as like an afterthought, because the only thing we don't get any kind of sample adventure or anything like that. The only kind of adventure hooks or story seed things that we get are these bullet points at the end of each of these regional chapters. And as much as I love the previous layout of how it was edited and written and it's organized, all of that is great. And then all of a sudden this is it's just bullet points, but they're giant bullet points of huge paragraphs, and they're trying to explain here are different situations that your party could do. And to me, this is one of the most important sections of a source book. Like, I would love to have more information and details on the adventures I can do now versus just giving me all this world building information. And it feels like this was just an afterthought of like, oh, by the way, here's things that maybe your party can do. Like, I wanted way more attention and time spent on this, and maybe had it flow better within the actual text of the information that we just got, rather than just afterthought of, hey, here's some adventure seeds that maybe you could think about doing. Ideally we would get a full-blown sample adventure, maybe like a level 1 or something, and there is, if you look at the 5e official campaign source books, there's precedent for that. If you look at Ravnica and Eberron, all of those have pretty simple adventures that you could almost do in a one-shot for level 1, but they do a good job of saying, here's what it's like to adventure in this world using, some of our unique creatures or concepts or things. And this doesn't have that, and I really feel like that was missing here. And frankly, I would have replaced, if not a third, then 2/3 of these regional chapters to give me an actual adventure in one of them that you rather expanded. So I kind of disagreed with the plan of creating all these different regions, knowing that if I, for example, actually wanted to run an adventure, in this mockery of American culture, I would have rather stuck to probably one city, done as much as I can with the jokes, and maybe, Hollywoods would have been the better one just because it's more familiar for everybody versus like a Seattle or something, and used that as a home base. But then maybe we could have had a sample adventure to take place there, and then I could have built along from there and used some funny jokes and things, rather than trying to paint this entire country. And I just don't see a campaign actually going to all these different cities and viewing all these different things and going that long. But that's the kind of style of DM that I do. I don't do the big, where do you want to go? Do what you want. I want to craft an actual story adventure, and then the players can work with that, around the confines of that. And then Chapter 5, Hollywood, which is probably honestly one of the best the best one of the 3 regions, despite being more about American politics. So the Watchtown one makes sense. I actually think that this one might have been the strongest one because people are most familiar with California, especially, Hollywood and movies and all that. And I'm going to give you an example of, it's funny because it's on the same page 100, which is an example of a clever piece of satire writing and then a not clever piece. So we'll start off with the clever one. This is under the description for Schwarzenegger, the Diplomazer. Excuse me. After a game-changing encounter with a predator he can no longer totally recall, he decided he was done coping to the kindergarten-esque egos of the theater community. Instead, he terminated his thespian career in order to make himself expendable to the Murkan people as a politician. With ice in his veins and a red-hot smile, the diplomizer makes his last stand as a terrifying presence in the Capitol building. Some argue that the collateral damage of his exodus from the theater community was a raw deal for everyone involved, but his escape plan left him as the man running the show in Hollywoods. Bonus points if you can name every single movie title that was included in that paragraph. That was a really fun read. For me, as somebody who's a movie buff and grew up on so many of Arnold Schwarzenegger films, I thought that was an amazing read, even if it's very obvious of, the character they're doing and all that. That's a fun piece of writing. Now, the not-so-fun one is originally founded by Harriet, Allison, Samantha, and Jacqueline Warner. The Warner Sisters agency is the most powerful studio in the city and the only true rivals of the super studio Disney, which lies on the other side of Murka in Idolando. That's just, you're just changing some names around and using the exact same stuff. That's the part that doesn't excite me nearly as much, and it just feels like it's just too obvious. And I think it would have been better if again, there was only one of these chapters that went to that degree, and maybe some of it was a little too obvious. Yes, that's a picture of Bernie Sanders as a wizard. But the fact that there's 3 chapters of this, there's a lot of that, where it's just a lot of very Jeffrey Bezos or something, and that's the kind of thing that I really roll my eyes at, and I'm like, all right, that's not, the Church of Mythology is the Church of Scientology. There's just too many exact one-to-one threads that I don't think it's low-hanging fruit. It's just not very clever. We're going to skip to equipment because I do think the magic items are very good. I was a big fan of these. Obviously, I loved getting the artwork. And again, this is a good reflection, kind of similar to the subclasses that recognize, celebrate, and utilize all of those wonderful American things. The dwarf Foreman stove instead of the George Foreman grill. That was pretty funny. Instagraph. There's a Twitter joke in here. There's little bird creatures that actually act as Twitter in this universe, which is pretty funny. Bath bomb, actual bomb. Cursed books. Ray-Bans. You got the protein shake. What was one that I wrote down that was particularly enjoyable? The Mantle of Old Glory. The red and white striped robe is spangled in ornate white stars nestled in a field of blue. Though it looks tattered and worn, it still provides warmth. As you don the mantle, you become instantly aware that you are breaking a number of flag codes. I laughed out loud at that because that's true. People love to defend the flag left and right, and then they will actually then wear shorts that are emblazoned with the flag pattern, which is odd that that's celebrated as a thing to do. But of course, if you have the flag touch the ground, then it's like everybody's up in it. It's a very weird cognitive dissonance thing, and cognitive dissonance is actually, I believe, a spell in this game too. The legendary greatsword of balance, truth, questing, insight, and more. If you didn't get the joke, LGBTQIA+, is a huge greatsword that when you swing it, it deals 1d4 of all the different kinds of damage types, and also you can cast Prismatic Ward and Prismatic Spray. It's a rainbow sword, which is freaking cool. It's just a lot of fun jokes and celebrations of all these different ideas, red pill and blue pill. And there's a lot of matrix jokes. Actually, the dodge this was a ability that the fighter action hero had. Seemingly legal contract, Star Killer is a lightsaber. Wand of the Forgotten Password. As 3 charges as an action, you can touch the wand to a non-magical lock and expand one of its charges. On a success, the lock is open. On a failed check, an audible voice heard from as far away as 300 feet proclaims loudly from the target lock, incorrect password. The tuned user must wait 10 minutes before trying again. And I think it does a fun job that you could actually sparingly use some of these jokey magic items in a non-jokey campaign, and that would be a really fun thing for players to laugh about and chuckle with. You wouldn't be able to get away with having, replacing all your magic items with these, but I think they really do transcend even the actual jokey universe, and they're just really cleverly done magic items. So a huge +1 to those. There's also this whole section on the Infinity Stones, which act as this creation myth to this world, which was created by Guy. Is it just Guy Gax Arneson? Is it? Yeah, basically just Guy Gax and Arneson. They didn't even try to necessarily cleverly change those names up that much. That created the universe and had these Infinity Star. What do they call them? Stones of Destiny. Sorry, which are clearly dice, and it's a whole creation myth that's used here. In fact, I will go as far as to say that the Pantheon, which is, I believe, the last chapter, is also, I was a big plus of that one because it's a celebration of a lot of iconic American pop culture figures and just fictional and non-fictional. Frankly, their Dark Father is basically Darth Vader, which is a god in this universe. They also have Stan Lee is the god of creation. Raddenbury is the god of logic and knowledge. Karen is the goddess of authority and motherhood, and she is depicted with her, of course, Karen blonde bob. Irwin, which is an Australian person, but definitely beloved in America, in American pop culture, is the god of Ranger, and he's of course depicted in his famous khaki shorts. So I thought that did a better job than the regional stuff of just making very obvious jokes about areas and things. And I thought the ones about the pantheon with the gods, I guess we can go ahead and switch to that because those are the ones I'm talking about right now. I thought does a good job of using all of those figures that are instantly recognizable, and I think I was able to recognize most of them, and turn those into the pantheon. And it cleverly mentions the fact that the American pantheon changes depending on the whims of the people. You know, it's basically just these ascended celebrity figures or pop culture icons that become our gods, which is, I think, part of the... It's been a while since I read about American gods, but I think that was part of the impetus there, was that's, gods are just created from faith, and that's what a lot of people believe in collectively is, just Darth Vader is very much a big figure for a lot of people, so of course he would become a god of darkness and, I think, fathers, which is probably not great. The actual creatures section, which I just skipped over, Chapter 8, is fine. That's the part where it actually takes the Trump joke too far, and don't get me wrong, I am definitely on board with hoping that Trump spends the rest of his life in prison. I think he's a horrible human being, but even then, I think there was more to satirize in this book on the entirety of American culture than just pounding that joke about Trump just right into the ground. I mean, there's literally, he's already got this stat block as a leader, and then he's got a stat block as like this monstrous beholder creature, and then he's got a stat block as like a hairpiece that latches onto people, and then there's stat blocks of him as like a businessman, and stat blocks of him as little goblins and gremlins. Like it way goes overboard. I guess the idea is you've got this figure, and then you've got all these minions and monsters modeled after him, but then that's basically most of what the monsters are. The coolest ones, in my opinion, which I think I actually have to scroll up for them. This is unfortunately a very big book, so you're seeing a lot of white pages as I scroll as it loads all of the picture. Oh god, there's the terrifying picture of Queen Killary, the Lich, whose phylactery is her husband Billary, which I guess, okay, sure. But I actually really liked the dragons, which I'm pronouncing strangely because they are literally dragons with guns for faces. And this is something that I wish this supplement or source book had done more of, which is take the fantasy element and use that as a change for how we came about our different the American culture in this universe versus our own. So, for example, the reason that guns are so beloved and ingrained in American culture in this universe is because this land once had these creatures called dragons roaming around that literally had just giant guns for faces. And that was such a powerful thing that, American colonists came in and conquered them, destroyed them, and was able to harvest a lot of their weaponry, and then that became a big symbol of like American pride. And that's a neat idea of world building that's kind of unique to this world, while also reflecting back to our world, and creates a lot of really cool art and a lot of cool stat blocks and ideas. So that was a really good example of, look at this art, of something that's unique to this world while also still being reflective of our own. Rather than just being like, hey, Jeff Bezos is a millionaire who is in control of a lot of corporations, and he's a sorcerer. Well, okay, that's not as interesting to me as, oh shit, we've got giant dragons in this universe with friggin' cannons and muskets and guns for faces, and that's why Murka has been so powerful with harvesting weapons and things, because they were these biological creatures. So I thought that was a really fun, cool, clever idea with some neat stat blocks in there. And I think that pretty much covers everything about this book that I can talk about. So let's go over my pros and cons for Monsters of Murka. Pros: professional layout and design with amazing original artwork. There is no question that the actual product is amazing looking. I was incredibly impressed with the design. It's very well edited. There were absolutely no mistakes. I might have ordered things a bit different. Maybe have put the Pantheon, closer to the history or something along those lines. Put the player options all together in one area. But that's very middling complaint. I mean, it's all very, very well produced and organized. Pros: over a dozen fun new subclasses that lovingly reflect American culture in excess. I thought the chapter on the subclasses was probably the strongest and does the best job of turning a lot of familiar elements of pop culture into fun subclasses. I would love to play that fighter action hero, for example. I thought would be enjoyable as hell. Pro: 40 humorous magic items that satirize modern technology and popular references. Pretty much the same thing, but I wanted to do a second bullet point because I did think the magic items were good in the same way, where they did a fun job of reflecting all those jokes and things, while also still being legitimately fun magic items that, again, you could even use in a campaign that wasn't even set in Murka. In Pro, I really enjoyed the Pantheon, the clever Pantheon of ascended celebrities and pop culture icons. That was good world building to me because it focused on individual characters and things that people would recognize and know, versus regions, which was more of a regional humor thing, and I didn't think it was particularly clever. And that is going into my first con, which is that the original chapters are mostly thin-veiled repeats of the same tired jokes. And I would have preferred. I think the way you get away with that is to only focus on one region and do it from there. But I think the problem is, because, and it's weird to complain I'm getting too much of a good thing, but because I got 3 chapters of 3 different regions, it really plays down to the fact that just repeating that same, like, haha, this is the, this area, and it's very obviously this area. Like, that's just the same joke over and over and over again for all these different places. And the other con is that there are no adventures in here, and the only story hooks are kind of used as an afterthought in those limited bullet points. I would have really liked to see some more detailed, thorough, comprehensive adventures and adventure hook story ideas and all of that. Final verdict: while some of its satire lands sharper than others, Monsters of Murka successfully expands a silly idea into a 200-plus page source book with clever world building and fun new player options. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.